Well, Charlie's not on here, but I'd like to thank Charlie for giving me another opportunity to speak. And thank you all for being on and listening.
Thank you, bro.
Uh, if if you want to look, I'm going to speak from Mark chapter 6 tonight, mostly from Mark chapter 6. Uh, we'll probably read the whole book of Romans before I'm done, but that's a joke. Anyway, Mark chapter 6, it's one of those especially insightful looks into the mind of God and the hardened hearts of men. Mark is recounting the events of that day when thousands of people had gathered to hear what Jesus had to say. They were hungering and thirsting for something that would give their lives meaning. They thought Jesus had that Jesus could tell them something that would make them better. I don't know if that's a good word, but they believed Jesus had something. Others had said, never have we heard anyone speak like this. So they longed for and needed a word from God, the God that they believed in, the God they trusted, the God of all the stories their fathers and their grandfathers had been teaching them since they were little children. They were all around Jesus and were calling, I think, calling like the man whose son had the demon when Jesus came down from the Mount of Transfiguration. And that man said, I do believe. Help me with my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. Jesus did. He was ready to tell them. And as they stood about them, about all around him, Jesus told them the story of God. I try to picture myself there. I mentioned this before that we need to use our imaginations and think about what what was it like? Here's Jesus and all these people. I mean, more than 5,000. We know there were more than 5,000 there. So I try and picture myself there hearing from the lips of God the words that gave meaning and made people whole. You said something about that in your prayer, that God was the one with the power who gives us these
Yeah.
kinds of things, makes us whole. So I try to picture myself there, and there were words. There were words Jesus gave that could mend broken hearts, words that could cleanse souls, words that could make them new.
Mm.
If any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Behold, old things have passed away. All things become new. Well, it it wasn't preaching, not really teaching that Jesus was doing. It was storytelling. He would share the history of their people and would give them parables that carry deep meaning. And even when they didn't understand and would ask later what the story or that story, this story or that story meant, he would answer them with more story. I wish I'd been there.
Yeah.
I bet we all wish we could have been there. Jesus, I mean, to be there with Jesus. As Mark tells us the story of this multitude, he's telling us that Jesus provided for the multitude at a time when the disciples were exhausted. They were in need of a break, and Jesus wanted to give it to them. He told them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place
Yeah.
and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Mark tells us this in the story. Jesus said that to them. They just came back from this preaching assignment Jesus sent them out on. So they were tired. And here's the apostles. He tells them, let's go. And they start going. And then he looked and he saw these leaderless people like sheep without a shepherd. And he could not just send them away. That wasn't Jesus. He didn't say, hey, sorry, we're on break. Couldn't do that. So they were in need. They were in need of a break. The apostles were in need of a break, but Jesus had compassion on those thousands, and he had to be with them. In his compassion, I don't know if you can hear that beeping or not. Did you hear that beeping?
I don't hear anything. I think we're all right.
Oh, okay. I'm hearing it because I wrote a Facebook piece today about a good friend who died, and he was just a great man, and people are responding to that. So, and I don't have Facebook on, but my computer keeps telling me I got a response to it. Anyway, if
Okay.
you're not hearing it, that's good. Anyway, Mark is telling us this story of these leaderless people that Jesus had compassion on. And so, in his compassion, he was revealing the God whom they had worshiped since really learning to speak, the God they didn't really know. Yes, he did see them as sheep without a shepherd, wandering, lost, and an easy prey for any who might come along to destroy them, perhaps even the roaring lion. He knew there were things they needed to understand, and so he began to tell them stories that served as teaching tools, opening their eyes to truths they had never seen or thought of before. Each thing taught was another revelation of God. Uh, they 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 were not a revelation from God, but rather a revelation of God. They were able to see God more clearly. Their minds were being open to things they maybe never thought of, and many things they just didn't know. I'm sure that they learned meanings of things they had been hearing their whole lives, but never really grasped the meaning of it or the significance of them. Stories from the greatest of storytellers, and their minds would be opened and their hearts were being filled. Yeah, I want to be there. I want to hear Jesus tell the old story, but tell it so that it's fresh and new. And I think that's what we need to do. We tell the old story, but we can't tell it like it's an old story. We have to make it fresh and new for the people around us, for the people who maybe they've never really heard that story. Okay, here in America, people have heard of God and people have heard of Jesus, but they don't know him. They don't know who God really is. I'm not talking about believers. I'm talking about the world around us. They don't know. So we have to make it new and fresh for them because they're not going to listen to an old story. So I want to hear Jesus tell it fresh and new. I want to see the joy on his face as he reveals his Father and the things the Father has planned. I want to see and understand that often the things he was revealing back then and today for us were not always expressed in words. Of course, the words were essential. Don't misunderstand me. He did have to use words, but he also taught a lot of things without words. I'm sure most of us know who Alison Krauss is. Yes, she's a singer, a country singer. She plays the violin. Uh, anyway, she had a song. She didn't write it, but she sang it, and it's called "You Say It Best When You Say Nothing at All." And Jesus was like that. He said things, speaking without words, but with action, with a smile on his face, with a frown on his face. And we do the same thing. Sometimes people will be saying something and we'll be listening to them and if we like it, maybe we'll smile. We're saying something, or we'll frown. We're saying something, or we'll nod, or we'll shake our heads, and we're saying something without saying a word. Jesus did that. He often spoke without words. On that day, he finished his verbal storytelling, and then he gave them one more, these thousands of people, he gave them one more story without words, while recognizing the lateness of the hour and the need for people for sustenance. Jesus has the disciples find some food. Yeah, what they found among a crowd of over 5,000 people, mind you, was 5 loaves and 2 fish. It was a pittance, a crumb, not nearly, and we know this, not nearly what was needed to feed all those people. Yet somehow it was enough, not just a token enough, not just a bite or two for everyone. No, he gave enough so that all could eat and be filled. They weren't hungry when they got through with the bread and the fish. He gave not just enough, but an abundance. 12 basketfuls were collected after the meal. The boy, here's a little boy. I don't know how old he was. Let's guess he's 12, 13 years old. And his mom had packed him a lunch. Said, "Hey, I heard Jesus is coming." The boy says, "Is he? I want to go and hear him. I have heard these stories. I want to go." Mom, fix me a lunch. So she packed him these 5 loaves and 2 fish. Maybe the loaves were like biscuits, what we eat. And 2 fish might have been sardines. Just a lunch for him. But he's sort of like us, when we go to a potluck and maybe our wife or our husband couldn't be there, or maybe one of our kids, or maybe somebody's sick and we want to take them something. Well, the abundance of all the food there, we get a plate and we fill it up and we put some foil or some saran wrap on it and we take it home. Imagine that boy. His mom had fixed him 5 loaves and 2 fish. And when he comes home, his knapsack is full of enough food that's going to last him for a week. That's how I picture it. He comes home and he says, "Here, mom," hands it to her. And she looks at this. "Where did you get this?" Said, "Jesus gave it to me." Yeah, I wonder what could be learned from this story itself. What does this tell us about the God Jesus was revealing? Were they getting it? These people, all these people, were they just thinking about the fullness of their bellies, kind of lying back like we do on Thanksgiving? After we've eaten and the football game's on, and we put the lazy boy chair back and we pat our bellies that are overextended. Maybe that's what they were thinking. I don't know what they were thinking, but How about those closest to Jesus? His apostles, those he'd been teaching and showing and leading for some time now. What was it that they didn't understand? With the leftovers collected and the people filled with stories and bread, Jesus says to the apostles, he told them that you cross the lake and I'll meet you on the other side later. I'm going to dismiss the crowd and I'm going to go and pray. So you guys just go on ahead of me. I'll meet you later. Well, this is not just happenstance, not just a good idea, not just something Jesus just wanted to do. There's purpose in his remaining. And part of it, so he could take time to pray. Yes, he wanted to be alone with his father and pray, but there was more to it than that. If you read verse 47 of chapter 6, as evening comes. So it's late in the day, sun's going down, and Jesus looks out at the water and he sees the apostles struggling against the wind. They were making little or no headway. The journey for them was proving difficult at best. The waves were growing larger. Their energy was ebbing. They needed help. They'd already been on uh, this itinerary preaching kind of thing, and they were tired before this preaching to the 5,000 and the feeding of the 5,000 and the rowing of the boat against the wind. So they are worn out. And, uh, and they were out in the middle of the lake. And Jesus was going to go to them. Well, how was he going to get there? He didn't have a boat, and they were out in the middle of the lake. What was he planning to do? Well, we know the story. He just walks out to them. You ever walked on water? Most of us would shake our head, no, but I have. Of course, it was in the middle of the winter in Michigan, and the lake was frozen over, but it was water. It's just in a different form. Jesus wasn't walking on ice, he was walking on the water, and he walks out to them. They were so pathetic in their struggles, don't you think? Their minds were on the wind, the oars, the fight against an enemy that they couldn't really see, but they could feel the effects of it. The boisterous, wicked wind. And then there was the distance. They had to go across the lake. They had far to go to reach the opposite shore, and they were, as I already said, bone weary. Was God uppermost in their minds, their thoughts? I, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Is God the first thing in our thoughts when things are not going well? Maybe, maybe it was the physical here and now that was foremost in their minds. They were wet from the spray, probably cold from the wind and the water. They were certainly tired, more than tired. They were exhausted. When you go back to Mark 6, verse 30, they had only just come back from that preaching journey. He could see they were tired, needed the time to recoup, and told them so. And then they met the crowd, and now they found themselves struggling desperately against the wind and waves. Picture it. Picture it, if you will. We know what people out in a rowboat, their boat was bigger than a rowboat because it held the whole 12 apostles, plus Jesus when he's with them. So the big fishing boat, but they had oars and they'd be rowing across. They had the sail probably, uh, and one of them might have been in the front of the boat, kind of keeping the direction proper, and one be in the back of the boat handling the rudder. and others rowing, and they'd probably take turns trying to row and fight against that wind. And here they were, and maybe the guy in the back with his hand on the rudder, he looked back and he sees somebody, something. He thought it was a ghost. Imagine their dismay, their shock, even trepidation when they looked up and they saw Jesus walking on the water. That had to be a frightening spectacle. If we saw somebody walking on the water like that, do you think we'd be afraid? I I think so. They thought he was a ghost. So the little faith that they had, maybe it just deteriorated. Fear did take their place. We read it. They greatly feared. I see them trembling, their bodies already worn from the preaching journeys, the day of preaching, the feeding, the wind, the resistance down, and now a ghost, one thing on another. Their eyes are wide. Their hearts must have been pounding. And maybe one or two of them even screamed out, "Dear God in heaven, save us." They're thinking of God now because he's a ghost. What do you do with a ghost? If he's dead, you can't kill him. He's a ghost, for crying out loud. Maybe, maybe they were thinking of God then. They could fight against the wind and the waves. Most of them were fishermen, so they knew how to fight against the wind and the waves. They didn't always beat the wind and the waves, but they knew how to fight that. But this was different. It was a ghost. They may have been that may have been the first time they thought of God asking him for help. Then Jesus identifies himself, tells them, "Don't be afraid, it's me." Was there relief? Well, perhaps, but not enough. The scene in Mark's account, which is the scene we're looking at, he doesn't talk about Peter getting out of the boat and all that stuff. He has a different point in view here. But the scene in Mark's account ends cryptically. It says he got into the boat with them, the wind ceased, they were utterly astounded. Verse 51. Why? Why were they astounded? Why were they utterly astounded? Verse 52 tells us, because this is an interesting thing that Mark says here, because they did not understand about the loaves and their hearts were hardened. What? What are we supposed to make of this peculiar story? They didn't understand about the loaves? Their hearts were hardened? You see, there's more to this story than just walking on the water. Though Jesus walking on the water is another part of the revelation of God, they were learning something about God with Jesus walking on the water. It's a way of teaching without saying a word. But there are many other elements to the story that we need to see. There are connections between the crowds, 5,000 plus people, and the disciples, between the feeding and the being in the boat, between the fear of the struggle against the wind, seeing a ghost, and the fear we see in them. In Mark 4, when Jesus stilled, if you run back to Mark 4, when Jesus stilled the storm back then, they said to themselves, "Who is this? Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him?" Mark 4:35 through 41 is the story there. And then there's the connection between the hardships of life and the wind against the disciples. Remember Bob Seger? Bob Seger, the Silver Bullet Band. He wrote and sang a song called Against the Wind. Against the Wind. Here's a couple lines from the song. It says, I began to find myself searching for shelter again and again, against the wind, a little something against the wind. I found myself seeking shelter against the wind. Hmm. I I think we do that sometimes. I think we need to do that sometimes as we are reminded just how vulnerable we really are against the wind, a little something against the wind. Finally, there is the confusion of the disciples about the loaves and the hardness of their hearts. I see when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, uh, Mark is not just giving us just a little collection of stories here and there trying to instill faith in us. He connects all of these things together. One thing is built on another and another and another. And the new paragraph is pointing back to the one before it and the story before it. We know this because we are told they did not understand about the loaves. And where were the loaves? Back early in the story, where the 5,000 were there. In the middle of the day when Jesus was getting ready to send them away, he says to the disciples, give them something to eat. And they found 5 loaves and 2 fish. And now we're told they didn't understand. What? The loaves? They're in a boat trying to cross the lake, fighting the wind and the waves. And what do the loaves have to do with anything? What is it that they did not understand about the loaves? So we have to think about this. It's not something you just read that and you go on. You read that and it should cause us. And I know that, don't get me wrong, dry throat. We you try and you get yourself on a schedule and you try to read through the Bible in a year. Lots of people do that. They start January 1st, go all the way through December 31st, reading a certain portion of scriptures every day. But as we read it, but we don't always think about what we're reading. We read it, and sometimes we come to a passage like this and we read it, and then we keep reading, and we miss something that's there. And I mean, we all do that. I do that. I couldn't tell you how many times I've read that before. And I don't know, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. Uh, I was reading that and I came to that and I thought, what in the world does that mean? So, since I didn't know all the answers, I started searching for people who had ideas and thoughts about it. And I thought, okay, I want to know what that means. They didn't understand about the loaves. Hmm. So what we need to do is to quit limiting the scriptures to just a passage or two. You grab a passage here and you throw it down. You grab another passage, you throw it down until you got maybe 8 or 10 passages, and you say this is truth. Well, yeah, maybe, but maybe not. maybe those passages don't have anything to do with what we're trying to discuss. Last night, we were having a discussion, uh, in our Bible class. We have a small group that meets on Wednesday night. So we can talk back and forth, because it's just a small group. And and we're willing to listen to things that, if you spoke to a whole congregation, somebody's going to get offended with the things that you're questioning or saying, and that kind of thing. And so you never grow, you never change, because you can't bring it up. And last night we were talking about something, and a passage was brought up that had absolutely nothing to do with what we were saying, because it had an entirely different context, even though it appeared to fit. But I remember something in Jim's preaching many years ago, and I'm sure we've all heard it. He'd say, similarity of speech does not necessarily mean similarity of subject. And he warned us, just because they may sound similar, check the context. Make sure that what you're taking from here fits in with what's over here. And just because they sound a lot alike, they may not have anything to do with each other. Well, that was the case last night. And it was pointed out, hey, read the context of the passage you just read. Doesn't have anything to do with what we're discussing. So, Mark is showing us that all of this fits together. His book in particular, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all fit together. And then when John comes out, things that John has to say deals with the things that were written in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it all fits together as the whole Bible fits together. So the context of any scripture is the Bible. Psalm 119, 160, the sum of thy word is truth. That's such an important passage. We need to just keep it right there all the time. So it's God's truth, and you add it all up, and there you have it. There's the truth. But it's not all the truth. God has so many things he hasn't revealed to us, and maybe in eternity it won't all be revealed to us. If he revealed everything to us, we would be God. We'll never be God. But I think we'll always be learning. But John is explaining things to us that Mark is picturing for us. John is saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he goes on and he tells us the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The Word did not become flesh in place of being the Word. It wasn't flesh that took the place of the Word. The Word became flesh. The Word was still the Word. Jesus wasn't Jesus until he was born a baby, and they named him Jesus. That was Jesus. But he was always the Word, even when he was a baby. And when Mary picked him up and kissed his face, she was kissing the face of God. We know that song. Anyway, here was in the Word, that was flesh, God and man uniquely joined together in the body of Jesus. And when we read Mark's gospel, we see him painting a picture of what that means. He's telling us that Jesus is more than the man standing in front of you, in front of the apostles. more than a prophet, more than a healer, more than a king. He's more than all of those. He can command the wind. He can drive out a legion of demons. He can break 5 loaves and 2 fish into a meal for more than 5,000 people and still end up with 12 baskets full. He can walk on water. Wow. And Jesus wants them to see this. He wants them not only to hear it and get it with their brains, but he wants their hearts. David said, you know, if I thought you wanted a sacrifice, I would give it. But that's not what you want. You want a broken and contrite heart. And that's what David gave him, a broken and contrite heart. So that's what God wants. He wants our hearts. And of course, he wants to fill us with the understanding of who he, God, is and what he is trying to teach or show them and us. The 5 loaves should have taught them about sufficiency. Still, they were out there in the boat and the wind was so strong. They were straining and struggling and confused. Their bellies were full, but their hearts were empty. Mark says their hearts were hard. Remember what Jesus said about bread in Matthew 16. This is chapter 16. You read Mark, says, but Jesus, aware of this, said, they were arguing, hey, nobody brought bread. We're out here in the middle of the lake, no bread. Who was supposed to bring the bread? And they're arguing back and forth. Jesus said, oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourself the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Take a look at Mark chapter 8. You should read this. Mark chapter 8, verse 18 through 20, especially there. But read the context and see the lesson there as well. Jesus questions them about how many baskets full they collected. So obviously, they needed to remember the loaves and the truth of the loaves more than just in their fight against the wind. They needed to remember in their fight against Satan and his wicked ways. About the loaves? Yeah. Their hearts were hard, yet Jesus went on to show them again what enough looked like. I struggle with faith and understanding. Do you sometimes? I know we say, well, those guys were with Jesus for 3 good years. They should have known better. They should have understood. Well, maybe so. But we've been given knowledge through their word, knowledge that they didn't have when they were in the boat. And yet we struggle against the wind and we don't understand ourselves about the loaves. Or if we understand, we forget sometimes. So we shouldn't fault the disciples for their fear and their hardness. We struggle with both. I know I do. And we fail to see that God is not just the God of sufficiency, although he is that. But our Father is more, not just sufficiency, but abundance. They fed the 5,000 plus with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, but when they finished, they had 12 basketfuls remaining. Abundance. What's more, he invites us to join in his abundance. Jesus invites us to join in his abundance. It may just be that the 12 baskets with fish and bread were the real lesson. The apostles were invited to join Jesus in that grand, miraculous event. They were invited to pass out the food and gather the abundance. Well, why do you suppose in this case there were 12 baskets full left over? Basketfuls. Sometimes I say baskets full, but the word is basketfuls left over. Why do you think that that's specifically pointed out to us? And pointed out again in Mark 8. How many apostles were there? 12. Was Jesus teaching them that their basketful, with their basketful, they could go out and do what he had just done? What they had just done? Were they to see people as sheep without a shepherd? Were they to feel compassion? Were they to teach and lead people to God, showing who God really was, the God of not just sustenance, not just a little, but abundance? Were they to make sure that all were fed? As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. Galatians 6. Maybe they were to hand their baskets over to the believers they brought up so that they could go out and do the same thing. Remember, Paul told Timothy, he said, the things that you've learned of me among the things that thou hast learned of me, you go out and you teach other people so that they may be able to teach others also. Is that what Jesus was teaching those apostles? Maybe these were the things they were supposed to grasp, but at the moment with the wind and the waves, they couldn't. Their hearts were hard. They were thinking of other things. Distraction is a vicious enemy, and they were distracted by the wind. The waves were fierce against them, and they probably didn't look to God for deliverance. They struggled against the wind without remembering the loaves and the lessons from the loaves. Could it be that his stepping into the boat and the wind ceasing and it's awful turbulence, the eerie silence, just picture it. The wind is blowing. We know what it sounds like when the wind's really howling out there. And if you're on the water and the waves start coming up, but all of a sudden the wind stopped, the waves stop, and everything's quiet, deathly quiet. And it was quiet immediately because of the effects brought on by the presence of Jesus. Were these, could it be, supposed to teach them and us that their task, our task, was to understand the loaves? Eat the bread, but give it away. What do we do with a hard heart? And what do we understand about the loaves? This is my Geordie ending.
You may all unmute, please. Yes. Feel free to comment. That all means a bunch to a lot of people. There's a lot there. A lot there. So
I never thought about the lessons without no words being said. Enough about that. No, I mean, I guess I'd said that. No, I never considered the lessons that were being given to us that where words weren't really involved, but we have to envision and see it, I passed over so much things in scripture now I see that I should take a week just to read one line, I think, just to try to grasp it. There's that much there. Thank you, Josiah. I really appreciate your lesson.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I like the connections that you are bringing up and challenging us to think about that. And what did it really mean? And what does it mean to us? And I liked what you said about we know, the apostles were going to go out and feed people. They were going to talk to the people that had no shepherds, and they were going to perform those miracles. So yeah, I hadn't ever drawn that connection before. Thank you.
Yeah,
That
good.
was, that was part of, they just cast out demons and they felt invincible. They felt like the top of the world, and he says even the demons are subject to us.
Yeah.
And that's, and then coming down off the mountain as you were talking about, and then the feeding of the 5,000. There was no developed theology in what his death meant. How could life come from me giving my life away, giving myself, giving my flesh away? And then Jesus says there's no profit. There's no profit in giving one's flesh away. But yet he was doing that. At that very moment, he was giving his life away in the giving of the loaves. This is my Father. This is what he's always done. Watch me. This is what I'm doing. And then he was providing life. They saw it as loss. And then that bread was talking about the coming passion. They would break my body and I would feed my sheep. And then he says to Peter, he says, feed my lambs.
Yep.
Still on this side of the passion, not knowing what that means. Well, how am I going to do that? What exactly does that mean? And then he challenges, well, what do you have? Well, we don't have much. We got these two little fish here. But we haven't done enough in our puny little world, and yet here he comes. And what do you have in light of me? That's when you have me, what do you have? And he was saying, I'm the source of life. In that illustration where they're saying about the loaves and the fish, their hearts were hardened, that he was beyond. Their hearts were hardened because he wouldn't jump through the theological hoops. He wasn't going to give them what provided on the terms that they wanted it to be provided. And then the big rejection. Then the 72 later said they leave him, and he turns to them and says, "Are you going to do the same thing of what that they're doing?" And then he really sees what they're made out of, and then he tests their hearts. He's testing them to see what they were made out of. And then he hardened those that refused to listen, and they walked off because, again, they were declaring on their terms nationally, where is this all going? And then he gives his life for the world. And the Father was always giving, my Father's true bread. I give you life that's truly life. And the basket's overload. Watch this. And then he does it. And then in Acts 14, you see the sending of the rain and the fruitful seasons. This is who my Father is. This is who I am. You don't love me or know me because you don't know my Father. Same thing. And then he feeds them, and then what do they get? This is who God has always been from creation. You're just too blind to see what he's doing. And you know what? It isn't until that side of the cross at the death, there's no theology, no developed idea in what his death meant. He didn't tell them. So I can understand that as they would see that as a loss and not a gain.
Oh yeah.
How would they look at that?
Well, they were sick. They had no hope. When he died, they thought that's the end. We had hoped. The two on the road to Emmaus, they said, but we had hoped. But now what? No hope.
Get to know me and don't try to generate in that self. If you know me, keep looking to me. If you have me, then you have all the resources you need. You don't need to worry about how you're going to generate that. I'll get it done.
Yeah, he told them when he sent them out to preach, he said, don't take any extra clothes, don't take another pair of shoes, don't take any money, don't take any food. You just trust that when you get to a town, people will take care of you because I'm with them. I'll take care of you through them.
I think we need the hard sayings. We need the hard sayings in order to really challenge our faith. It's like the same when we gloss over scripture. Unless we're facing a real challenge, we're not going to be confronted with God. We have to go through the wilderness. I know that Alan is going through a lot of pain. Some of you are going through a tremendous amount of pain. How do you know if your faith is where it needs to be unless you go through? You're going to have to go through it. We're all going to, we have to settle on that at some point. We're going to
Yes, that reminds me of the poem that Alan shared with us. Bring on the storms.
Alan, did you know you would be in the middle of the storm without any oars?
Oh, you
My
said
goodness,
so.
Alan.
I've had a thought about the apostles not understanding. And how that applies to me? I don't need to be ashamed that I don't understand. I just realized if I would have been with the apostles, I probably wouldn't have understood either. It's not a shame to not understand.
Yeah.
That's what I think that I've gained from this at the apostles. I think we said, if I was right there with Jesus, I'd have sure got it. I don't think that's right at all.
Boy.
No.
I don't think we'd have got it any more than the apostles got it in many ways. Maybe I just don't, because we're human beings and they are. Sometimes we give, I think, the apostles superhuman attributes, and they did. They were fishermen. They were Joe Blow. I mean, in a way, they were not. They were exceedingly knowledge of the Old Testament. I mean, but what I'm trying to say from my heart is that the challenge is to realize when you don't believe, to do what you suggested, Josiah. Start looking, start digging deeper, start trying to understand what is really being said here. There's so much being said in the scriptures that I never saw before. It amazes me. And people like you and other teachers, Sam, everyone who teaches, they bring that open more. And I've learned more in the Zoom class in 2 years than I did in 40 years in Sunday school class. I mean, and of course I was absent from the group for a long time, but am I making any sense?
Yeah, I mean,
yes, you are.
yeah. They were told to wait. They wanted the answers. Are you going to restore at this time the kingdom?
Yeah, good
Wait,
point.
I will reveal it to you. There are things, Alan, that weren't revealed. We have the full revelation.
Right, we see
You'll
it
never
now.
get the full, they didn't have what we had. Of course, we would have done what they did. So
We're talking about but Josiah has brought something forward that at the beginning is that, okay, let's deal with us today now. What do we do?
rely on God.
We're not living back then. How do we reach those around
the bread,
us right
rely
now?
on him.
What's the lesson?
Got anything. Alan, I want you to rely on him. I know you're in pain. I want you to rely on God.
Yeah, one thing about God, you read the Psalms, they're full of it. They didn't like everything that God did. When you read it, you recognize they didn't like everything that God did, but they loved God.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
we don't like everything that happens in our lives, but we love the God who allows those things to happen.
It makes it easier, doesn't it, Josiah? If you love God, it makes it to take the medicine when there are times we don't want to take the medicine.
Yeah, we don't like the medicine. But a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Mary Poppins.
There's got to be a song.
No, that's the
Mary Poppins.
No, that's not Mary Poppins. It's what is it? The Sound of Music. Yeah, the Sound of Music.
I'm sorry.
She sings it to the kids. Teaches them that song.
Is it that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam, anything?
It's been great. I always like to underscore these. When Josiah got into the thing about the building with the verses and on, he's singing my song there that I
Yeah.
discovered. We've got to get into the stories. We got to hear the context and quit listening for what we want to hear, but what is God telling us? And so I just want to add this to it. And when you're reading any of the Gospels, it's just a thing that really starts popping out with study, not at once, but with study. Every one of those stories is about who he is. And
Yeah.
and it's about coming to believe. And he asked one, if you knew who I am, and off it goes. And they did not understand about the loaves. That means they're still not getting it about who he is. And
Right.
and
That's right.
and the whole rejection of the religious leaders, it's all about just not getting who he is. How can you, being a man, and so we
Yes.
crucified Christ. How can there can't be no crucified Messiah? He lives forever. And so they're quoting verses. That's the thing is Josiah's talking about. They can just stack up those verses all day long and saying stuff that's not so. So I want to get back to my
Great.
point.
Great.
Every story is about who he is. And so
Yeah.
if you permit me, let me just at the end of Jesus' ministry, when he's through with the public ministry, and he's been totally rejected by all the religious leaders, have had all these little standoffs, and then he's confronted them about the Messiah, his body's not corrupted, and what about how can you say he's the son of David when David spoke of him as Lord, and they don't have an answer, but that was the end. There was no further. He closed that whole thing out, and I think it's just the most concise statement about what all of the stories are about. In John chapter 12, verses 14, verses 44, then Jesus cried out. It's then it's sort of like if you look at this in conclusion to all of my public ministry, and you've seen it, guys, you 12 apostles, you've seen how they rejected, you've had your own hard-hearted scenarios. And let me tell you this, he said, he who believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me.
Mhm. There you go.
He who sees me sees him who sent me. I have come as a light into the world that whoever believes in me should not abide in darkness. And if anyone hears my words and does not believe, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. He who rejects me and does not receive my words has that which judges him. The words that I have spoken will judge him in the last day. Uh, uh, and so forth. He who rejects me and does not receive my words, as that which judges him. The word I have spoken will judge him in the last day, for I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me, who gave me a command,
Mm.
what I should say and what I should speak, and I know that his command is everlasting life. Therefore, whatever I speak, just as the Father has told me, and so on. That was the end of his public ministry. From then on, he's off talking to 12, preparing for life without him around. But they have, whatever we can sympathize with the way they felt, and we would have done it too, but they had to change.
Mm.
It's not like they got away with it because somehow they were good. They had to change. And so that whole hard-heartedness, it disappeared. If you're reading anything they write in the other books, Acts and Romans and all of that, there was no more of this hesitation and being amazed at who he is. No, he's awesome. I'm not surprised that he can walk on water.
Oh,
Their
good.
hearts were hard. Them being amazed showed that their hearts were hard. They hadn't understood anything yet. Why would you be amazed? I mean, knowing what you know. So it's all
Yeah.
stories. It's not about what he can do. Yes, we understand, knowing that he's God and he can do whatever, and we know he's a good God, and so we pick all that up. But it's really for the one thing, and for us to know that he has all authority and that he is Christ, that he is God, that he is everything about him is God's doing, and that's what we have to come to. It's not like a pep talk or motivational literature.
That's for sure.
Now, it's got great motivation, but it's not motivational literature. It's about what believing the truth about who you are in this universe. So
That's good.
no. So, but Josiah, you carried the ball. I mean,
Yeah.
to the end of the game, and I mean that was good. Drawing up
Who
more.
are Josiah? It was a question of who he was. Who is this? They were offended.
It's all about who he is.
That
It's
was
not-
happening. Is that right? In the boat?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They question, who is this? That even the wind and the waves obey him. They didn't get it.
I didn't know.
And they were
Not
even
then.
you're saying they were even resisting, Sam. They were even resisting.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they had to change, and we have to change.
I looked that verse up. The Greek word for that, their hearts were hard. It's a verb that indicates it was hardening. Their hearts were getting harder. The more they saw of his miracles, the more they were just getting full of all of that. What a great surprise! But he's like a magician. They were just for so many things, and it was the more he would do, the more it was actually hardening them, and that's why, as you spoke just about chapter 8, and it even came after the resurrection, the women telling, and Jesus scolded them. It said he chastised them for the hardness. Why didn't you?
Yeah.
At least by
You
now.
think I'm so great? Let's
I
say
mean, if somebody comes
5,000.
tell
Go
you,
ahead.
surely you would believe, not just send
Yeah.
them away, because at least you say, really? You could have said something better than what you did. They shamed the women for bringing such a silly story. I mean, that's hard hearts. That's hardness.
Feeding 5,000 isn't just a miracle. It goes way.
It's a sign.
Miracles, and that was the thing.
Go read the Bread of Life discourse, and when that was where Jesus drew them in. This is not about me feeding you bread. This is about who I am.
Man.
Who I am. You can't even come to me unless you are drawn by the things that God does.
Power. So much power there.
You don't.
Yes.
If you're not drawn by the things God does, you'll never find me.
Mm.
And if you can't find me, you haven't found God. And it's both ways. It's it's all about who he is.
How come you don't do a sermon on it? Yeah.
I just did it. I'll do it again if you want to.
No, I mean, really, you talk about being confronted.
Yeah.
Oh, they're being confronted, all right.
Yeah. And, I've heard so many lessons where Josiah, I was waiting for it, really. I love it. I just hate for people to miss what God is doing. And I've heard so many lessons, and they talk about how they were amazed, and Jesus said, "Oh, you little faith," but never talk about never address the hearts were hardened thing, and what's really going on here, and what's this really all about. I've heard that just the lesson taught, and just skip that verse. Why do that? That's the whole point of the story. Mark told the story to bring you to that point. What's going on with these apostles? Jesus is teaching them and showing them, and look what's going on. And so he punctuates it there. He punctuates it a little later, and then he punctuates it at the end with their hardness of heart. And of course, Jesus got them together, and after that, and they talked about, okay, is this not what this what the prophet said? You remember what I said? And you've got my resurrection, and we've got the scriptures here, and now, they finally gave up all their silly thinking and got in line with God, because they knew what it was. Thomas sat down and said, "Oh, my Lord and my God."
Yeah. He finally got it, didn't he?
He was the first one, and
Finally got it.
we call him Doubting Thomas. No, he was the first
Oh, yes.
who just really, bam,
Yeah.
my Lord and my God.
Yeah.
That was it.
The theological Christ doesn't sell.
No.
It doesn't sell, Sam.
the gospel, if you read the gospel, that is what Josiah was trying to talk us, lead us, encourage us to do. If you do that, it's not a theological Christ. It's a real man who was God coming here to visit us, and which we got to somehow come to terms there is a God, and not just that there is God, but this God of the Old Testament is God, and this is what He's done. There He is. There's Jesus, just like He said He would. And so the Old Testament builds it. I liked your phrase. You said the Bible is the context for every verse. I thought, oh, that's a good one. I liked. I want to remember that because I just.
But Sam, it's our thinking that gets us, because we get locked in, and then we lock God in. We go to God for how we think, and then we get locked into the thinking.
Yeah.
We don't see
We try to understand it from a worldly viewpoint, and it doesn't work.
Right.
What Peter was doing when Jesus said, "I got to go. I'm going to go die." No, you're not going to do that. He just said you're the Christ. Well, Peter, how can you say he's the Christ? He's the Son of God, and then you're telling him stuff. You're telling him, no, that's not right. Think about what. Say, we're really kind of like Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter.
Yes.
Those stories talk about how our brains work when
Yeah.
we process the impact. Like, what's the meaning of those loaves? What's the meaning of 5,000? Did you catch that?
Then you're speaking about balance. In a certain way, you're saying balance.
Well, I'm just saying you got to read. You got to hear what it's saying, not see the words and throw your understanding into it and interpret in light of your understanding. You got to get rid of that junk, and you got to start. What is God telling me here? And if I'm always trying to qualify, well, I don't know about that. I don't see that. I'm trying to let I'm struggling with that. I'm not sure. So I mean, there's got to be a day when you break, you realize, wait a minute. I don't have any way of kicking back at any of these words. I don't know anything.
Yes, that's a good start.
So if I don't catch what's coming out of heaven and listen to it in its purest form, what? Don't add to it, don't subtract from it. Just sit here and either I believe it or I don't. And if I don't, I gotta know I'm wrong. Until I know I'm wrong when I don't believe something, then I'm not.
And we're all wrong. That's our first confession. You're right, and we're wrong. Yeah, that's right.
I look at some things and I can't understand it. And I say, I'm not believing it.
Yeah.
So I'm just not understanding something. Please, God, help me.
Yes. Open our eyes and help us to see.
Help me to see it, but I don't see it. But I know I'm wrong for not seeing it. There's something.
Yes.
Well, I think that's what we do. We do ask God, help me to understand this. I see this, but I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I mean, you try and read the book of Romans, and there's so much in there. And I try to ask God, okay, help me understand this. And the Holy Spirit is in us. His purpose, one of his purposes, not just his total purpose, but one of his purposes is to help us, to guide us into truth. And if we allow him to work in us, maybe he does that by sending a teacher. Maybe he does that.
That's right. Yeah, I believe that.
By,
absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
You said
different
something.
ways. God helps us in many ways.
Yes.
We just have to be open to it.
Yeah, unlimited.
Alan,
go ahead.
You just said something. If we allow him to, I think that's a
cooperation.
That's a big topic. When you were talking and Sam was talking, a voice kind of came in my head and said, "Alan, do you really know me?"
That's a lifetime. That's the process.
Didn't Paul say to Timothy, "Don't quench the spirit"?
Yeah, we're capable of it, aren't we?
Yeah, we can do that. But if we ask him, open my mind,
Mhm.
open my heart. Let me see.
Yeah.
And that's
And,
the Spirit's work. That's
Yeah.
the Spirit's work, Josiah.
Yeah, that's the
That,
spirit.
that is. Anytime you
Yeah.
have your eyes open, that, and especially, and how do we test that? If it points to Him, then we know. That's it.
But all of it takes humility. We have to be,
Yeah.
we ask with humility.
I have a series of lessons that I do occasionally. I'm always struggling to not just use a canned lesson to try to do I know, put the best I know at the moment to explain something. But I have a series of lessons where I try to talk about the school of obedience. We don't really, and there's quite a few verses, and I'm not coming to mind now, but we gain the ultimate knowledge of God through obedience to God.
Yeah.
And just a little simple illustration, until you've actually found through the actual force of obedience, and not just because I'm going to be a good person or something, but it's because God, I know I need to forgive, and once you've done it, you're on the other side of a whole gulf of understanding of where that puts you now, and it puts you in a whole different place in the scope of all your relationships. The knowledge you have once you understood where I am now, that I forgave, where I would have been if I had been hanging on to it and said I can't forgive, or I just can't get
Oh,
around.
sure.
Well, that's me over here, and actually, when I'm over here at two entirely different places, mentally and spiritually. So
Mm.
that now it's called the school of obedience,
Mm.
and I see little smatterings of it just in various verses all over the Bible. Hebrews 5:9, it.
What is 5:9?
Well, it's Hebrews 5:9 is we, he became perfect.
That's 5:8. 5:8. Jesus, uh, he learned, he became
Obedience.
perfect by, uh, he
Obedience
learned
of
obedience by the
salvation.
things which
Yeah,
he suffered.
very
And
important.
but he became the author because of that, he became the author of salvation to the obeying ones. The
Yeah.
translation worked much better if it accurately went to the Greek. So it would be the obeying ones, the ones that are doing that.
Right.
In several verses, but we wouldn't talk about the knowledge of God, and it's not just opening the book and having an intellectual pursuit. There has to be obedience and following and just yielding. And that's when we learn God. We don't know God just from reading stuff and hearing, until we step out and make some kind of a move, that knowledge is cut off
Mm.
to some degree. Jesus said that, those who obey me, I will come and make
Yeah, because we do not learn what obedience entails, and when we're involved in life's process, we learn what obedience entails, and then God shows us something else. This requires another avenue open up. Want you to do this, but it's
Yeah.
all with the willing heart. It's all starts with a belief. They were disobedient because they didn't believe. So
Exactly.
that's where it starts. And then belief leads to obedience. You can't separate the two. It is the obedience of faith. Paul says you can have law without obedience. People
Yeah.
can do law and be disobedient. So he's talking about the obedience of faith. You can't have obedience without faith. Cannot. Paul will never separate those two. Always in light of him, our response to him, and that's our obedience. He calls for obedience. There's no doubt about it.
If you want to quote a verse, John 14, about 25 or
Sure.
6, says, those who obey me, I will come, my Father will come, and we will reveal ourselves.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that revelation, that knowledge, they heard, they knew something to obey, they believed in God, but the knowledge, the revelation only comes to those who have obeyed Him.
Process. That's right.
So
I can't argue with that.
I don't have all the things, but there's some lessons on that I
That's
love.
good, Sam. That's good to open up.
They get you
Yeah.
chasing your tail a little bit, but we we've taken so many simplified things and got us so canned that a lot of our young people will come and they ask questions and get one of our crazy, silly answers, and they walk off and leave us. And we've got to get down and say, no, there's something here. We need to dig this out. This needs to be talked about. We don't just go to
Yeah.
Sunday and listen to a lesson and walk out. Wasn't that nice? And go about our week. And
Well, Jesus being a man offered obedience to his father. Are you glad he offered obedience to his father? Because that obedience was the only way to reconcile, to give God what he wanted. And so disobedience is unbelief, a hard heart. It is a hard heart.
Yeah. Hey, guys, it's
all right.
It's
Kevin,
9:30.
I've got to go.
Yeah,
love you all. I'll post.
Hey, we could stay here for the next 3 weeks if
Yeah.
we didn't get tired, but we do get tired. So
yeah. Gotta go.
Well, I don't
God
have
bless.
access to the nuts this week, Sam, because Mary Ellen, I'm not at Mary Ellen, so I missed
Alan,
the
I hope I'll be praying for you, Alan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alan.
Thank you.
Alan, do you have
Yeah,
anything
Josiah.
scheduled?
Baby.
I
You
got
have
it.
scheduled something for your health?
What?
Anything, Alan?
I think a firing squad may be appropriate. I don't know.
Joanne?
No, I'm trying some new stuff. Please post this, Kevin. I can't digest everything is in. I need to hear it again and again. So
Yeah, will do.
please
Hey,
post it.
Yes, sir.
I usually write everything out word for word. I'll send that.
Oh,
Good.
well,
The
Yeah,
lesson
you
for
forward
tonight.
it,
I'll
send it
just
to
send
me. I
it
can
right.
forward it, Josiah, if you want people to have it.
I do that.
Go ahead, Donna.
Joanne, what about the adoption for Billy Wilson? I thought how did it go?
2 more trials.
Of course,
Oh,
of course.
I know, June 10th and July 1st.
Sure.
And evidently Sarah sounds positive that things are going well. So
Okay.
we still have to wait.
Yep.
2
The
more.
judges are the executive branch of government.
and
There
Josiah,
you go.
could you send it to us?
Yeah, send it to everybody.
Yeah, send it to me and I'll forward.
Thank you.
Josiah, if you do that.
I'll
You all
do
have
that.
a great night. Love you all dearly.
Good
Thank
night.
you so much for. Yeah, this is good. This is good. We need it.
This is great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You have a good night, Sam.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. I love you.
All
All right,
right.
you first. You first. You push the button and I'll be gone.